The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Yankton, Dakota Territory, 1879. Penny Fletcher stood amid the crowd gathered for the burial, her face a mask of stoic grief that belied the storm raging within. The townspeople murmured empty condolences as they drifted away from the fresh grave, not a single one offering real help in the week since her husband had been gunned down in cold blood. Penny waited until the last of them had left before falling to her knees beside the simple wooden cross. At 26, she never imagined she'd be a widow, alone in a frontier town with nothing but debts and broken promises. Thomas had been a good man, not perfect, but hers until 3 bullets from an unknown assailant had stolen him away one night as he walked home from his carpentry shop. "You promised you'd never leave me," she whispered, fingers tracing the roughly carved letters of his name. Her dark hair, usually neatly pinned, had come loose in the prairie wind, whipping around her tear-streaked face. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her stiffen. Visitors to the cemetery were rare, especially at dusk. Penny quickly wiped her eyes with her sleeve and rose to her feet, instinctively stepping between the grave and the newcomer. The stranger rode a chestnut stallion, his face partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn hat. Dust covered his denim and leather, telling of a long journey. When he dismounted with fluid grace, Penny noted the revolver at his hip, not unusual in these parts, but still cause for wariness. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Forgive the intrusion." "The cemetery is public property," Penny replied, her voice steadier than she felt, "though most folks don't come calling at this hour." "I'm not most folks." A hint of a smile touched his lips before fading back into solemnity. "Name's Finn Blackwell. I've come a long way looking for you, Mrs. Fletcher." Penny's breath caught. "How do you know my name?" "Thomas sent me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Thomas is dead, has been for a week now." She gestured to the fresh grave. "So unless you're claiming to speak with ghosts, Mr. Blackwell, I'd thank you to leave me to my grief." Finn's gaze held hers without wavering. "He sent me before he died, madam. I was 3 days' ride from here when it happened." "What business could my husband possibly have with a man like you?" Penny asked, taking in his trail-worn appearance and the careful way he carried himself like a man accustomed to violence. "Protection," Finn answered simply. "Thomas wrote to me nearly a month ago, said he feared for his life, and yours." The world seemed to tilt beneath Penny's feet. "No one helped me when he died," she said, her voice breaking. "I begged Sheriff Mills to investigate, but he called it a robbery gone wrong. Everyone just moved on." Finn stepped closer, and in the fading light she saw the determination in his weathered face. "Then he sent me to do it now." "Why would I trust you?" Penny challenged, even as desperate hope flickered within her chest. "Because I've got this." Finn reached into his vest pocket and produced a folded letter, the paper creased from travel but unmistakably bearing Thomas's handwriting. Penny's hands trembled as she took it, recognizing her husband's distinctive script. She read silently, her face paling as the words confirmed everything the stranger had said. Thomas had feared for their lives, had sensed danger closing in after witnessing something he shouldn't have. He'd written to Finn, an old army comrade who'd become a bounty hunter, begging him to come to Yankton. "He saved my life at Antietam," Finn explained quietly. "I owed him a debt I could never repay. Now I aim to at least honor his last request." "Which was what, exactly?" Penny asked, clutching the letter to her chest. "To protect his wife and find the men responsible for whatever trouble he was in." Finn replaced his hat, his expression grim. "So that's what I intend to do, Mrs. Fletcher, starting now." As night fell over Yankton, Penny made the fateful decision to trust the mysterious cowboy who'd appeared at her darkest hour. She couldn't know then how their lives would intertwine, or that within Thomas's tragedy lay the seeds of an unexpected future. The modest Fletcher home sat on the outskirts of town, a small but well-built structure that spoke of Thomas's carpentry skills. Penny moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, setting a pot of coffee to boil on the stove while Finn secured the property, checking windows and doors with a vigilance that both reassured and unsettled her. "Your husband was a skilled builder," he remarked, running his hand along the smooth wooden frame of the door. "I remember him fashioning shelters out of practically nothing during the war." Penny poured 2 cups of the strong black coffee. "He built this place himself, dreamed of expanding it one day." She hesitated before adding, "He never spoke much about the war." "Most of us don't," Finn replied, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. "Some memories are best left buried." "Yet here you are because of a promise made in those times." "A debt," Finn corrected. "There's a difference." Penny studied him across the table the way he sat with his back to the wall, eyes regularly scanning the windows, fingers never far from his weapon. This was a man who lived constantly on alert, who'd seen the worst of humanity and survived. "Mr. Blackwell," "Finn, please. Mr. Blackwell was my father, and he wasn't a man worth remembering." "Finn," she amended, "I appreciate your sense of obligation, but I can't ask you to risk your life for a widow you barely know." "You didn't ask. Thomas did." His eyes met hers. "And I intend to find out why someone wanted him dead badly enough to pull the trigger. In my experience, men who die like Thomas did usually saw something they shouldn't have, or knew something someone wanted kept quiet." Penny's fingers tightened around her cup. "The sheriff said it was random violence, a drifter looking for money. Was anything taken?" "No." Thomas still had his pocket watch and the day's earnings from the shop. Finn nodded as if confirming something. "Tell me about his final days. Was he acting differently, worried about anything in particular?" Penny closed her eyes, forcing herself to revisit the painful memories. "He was working later than usual at his shop, said he had a special commission that required extra attention." She paused, remembering. "And he was agitated, watching over his shoulder when we walked through town. I asked him about it, but he just said business dealings were complicated sometimes." "What kind of commission?" Finn pressed. He never said specifically, only that it was for someone important passing through town. Penny frowned. "Come to think of it, he did mention heading to the Territorial Bank several times that week, which was unusual." "Thomas kept most of our savings at home." "The bank." Finn set down his cup. "Who runs it?" "Elijah Montgomery. He came from Chicago about 3 years ago, bought the bank and half the businesses on Main Street since then." Penny's expression darkened. "He offered to buy Thomas's shop just last month for far less than it was worth. Thomas refused." "And how did Montgomery take that refusal?" "Not well. He's not accustomed to hearing no." Penny hesitated. "He was at the funeral, actually. Offered to buy the shop again, said it would help with my unfortunate financial situation." Finn's eyes narrowed. "Mighty considerate of him." "I refused," Penny said, lifting her chin. "That shop was Thomas's life. I won't let it go, especially not to a man like Montgomery." Smart decision. Finn stood, moving to the window to peer through the curtains at the darkness beyond. "First light tomorrow, I'd like to visit that shop, see what Thomas was working on before he died." "I have the key," Penny said, rising to her feet. "I haven't had the heart to go there since it happened." "The sheriff said Thomas was shot in the alley behind it, walking home. Then that's where we'll start." Finn turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "You should get some rest, Mrs. Fletcher. I'll take the first watch." "Watch? You think we're in danger here?" "Thomas thought so, and that's good enough for me." He gestured to the sofa. "I'll be right here if you need anything." Penny wanted to protest, to say that surely such precautions weren't necessary, but the weight of Thomas's letter in her pocket and the memory of her husband's worried glances in those final days stopped her. Instead, she nodded, gathering her strength for whatever lay ahead. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning it despite her lingering reservations. After Penny had retired to her bedroom, Finn positioned himself by the window, the familiar weight of his Colt revolver a comfort in the stillness. The Dakota Territory night pressed dark and heavy against the glass, but it wasn't the darkness that concerned him. It was what or who might be hiding within it, waiting for the right moment to strike. Thomas Fletcher had been a cautious man, not given to flights of fancy or unfounded fears. If he'd sensed danger circling close enough to reach out to an old war comrade turned bounty hunter, then the threat was real. And now that threat had claimed his life, leaving his widow vulnerable and alone. Finn sipped his cooling coffee, gaze fixed on the shadowy yard. He'd made a promise to a dead man, and he intended to keep it not just out of obligation, but because something about Penny Fletcher's quiet strength and unwavering loyalty to her husband's memory stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. Dawn would bring answers, he hoped. Or at least the beginning of them. Morning arrived with a pale, watery light that did little to warm the chill spring air. Penny emerged from her bedroom to find Finn exactly where she'd left him, alert and ready despite the night's vigil. If he was fatigued, he showed no sign of it. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, moving to stoke the fire in the stove. "Enough," he replied, which she suspected meant not at all. "Any chance of breakfast before we head to town? Been living on trail rations for days." The simple request was so ordinary, so domestic amid their extraordinary circumstances, that Penny found herself smiling for the first time in days. "I think I can manage eggs and biscuits, Mr. Blackwell." "Much obliged, Mrs. Fletcher." As they ate, Penny studied her unexpected protector more carefully in the daylight. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, a few years older than Thomas had been. The lines around his eyes spoke of squinting into harsh sunlight and hard living, but there was a gentleness in the way he handled her mother's china cups that belied his rugged exterior. "You mentioned you're a bounty hunter," she ventured. "How does one come to such a profession?" Finn considered this as he buttered another biscuit. "After the war, I found I wasn't much suited for normal life anymore, too restless, too haunted by what I'd seen," he shrugged. "Tracking men who have done wrong gives purpose to skills I might otherwise use poorly. And you're good at it." "I'm alive," he said simply. "In my line of work, that's endorsement enough." They finished their meal in companionable silence before preparing to head into town. Penny changed into a simple dark dress, pinning her hair severely at the nape of her neck. Widow's clothes, practical and somber. She caught Finn watching her as she retrieved her shawl. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking Thomas would be grateful to know you weren't left entirely alone." He cleared his throat. "Shall we?" The walk to town took them past neighbors who eyed Finn with undisguised curiosity. Penny acknowledged their greetings with polite nods, but offered no explanations for her companion. Let them wonder, she thought defiantly. Their concern came too late to help Thomas. Main Street was already bustling with morning activity wagons delivering goods to stores. Cowboys fresh off the trail seeking breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Ladies gathering for shopping expeditions. Penny led Finn past the general store and the saloon to a modest building with Fletcher carpentry painted in neat letters above the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the lock. This was the first time she'd returned since identifying Thomas's body. The last time she'd seen him alive, he'd kissed her goodbye at their front door, promising to be home for supper. A promise broken by bullets. "Take your time," Finn said quietly, his presence steady behind her. With a deep breath, Penny pushed the door open. The familiar smells of wood shavings, varnish, and linseed oil enveloped her immediately. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating the workbenches and tools Thomas had arranged with such care. Everything was exactly as he'd left it: a half-finished chair in one corner, sketches pinned to the wall, a cup of pencils on his desk. This was his life, she whispered. Everything he loved doing. Finn moved past her, his trained eyes scanning the workshop. "Did the sheriff search the place after Thomas died?" Briefly. "He was looking for anything that might identify the robber who killed my husband." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "And you? Have you looked through his papers, his personal effects?" Penny shook her head. I couldn't bear to, not yet. Finn nodded, understanding. May I? At her assent, he began a methodical search of the workshop, examining drawers, shelves, and the desk where Thomas kept his accounts. Penny moved to the workbench, running her fingers over the tools her husband had used with such skill. Each chisel, each plane, each saw had been meticulously maintained. Thomas was always organized, she said, more to fill the silence than anything else. Said a craftsman's mind should be as tidy as his workspace. Finn made a noncommittal sound as he flipped through a ledger. Did your husband typically keep records of all his commissions? Yes, he was very particular about that, even sketched designs for each piece. Then why is there nothing here about this special project he mentioned to you? Finn held up the ledger. His last recorded commission was a dining set for the Millers, completed 3 weeks ago. Penny frowned, coming to look over his shoulder. That can't be right. He was working every evening, said it was important. Secret, more like, Finn murmured. Important enough to hide from his own records. A chill ran down Penny's spine. What does that mean? It means whatever Thomas was working on, he didn't want anyone else to know about it. Finn closed the ledger, which makes me all the more interested in finding out what it was. He continued his search, tapping walls and floorboards, checking for hidden compartments. Penny watched, bewildered by this new mystery. Thomas had always been forthright, honest to a fault. What could have driven him to such secrecy? Ah, Finn said suddenly, kneeling beside a loose floorboard near the back wall. Your husband may have been secretive, but he was still a creature of habit. He pried up the board, revealing a small hollow space beneath. Inside lay a small leather-bound notebook and a folded piece of paper. Finn extracted them carefully, handing the notebook to Penny while he unfolded the paper. It's a map, he said, studying it, of what looks like part of the bank building. Penny opened the notebook with trembling fingers. Inside, in Thomas's neat handwriting, were notes about measurements and materials, but also observations that made little sense to her. Guard changes at midnight. East wall weakest point, 2 minutes between rounds. What? What was he doing? She whispered, the book suddenly heavy in her hands. Finn was about to answer when the shop door burst open. Both of them whirled to face the intrusion, Finn's hand instantly moving to his weapon. Sheriff Mills stood in the doorway, his weathered face set in hard lines. Behind him loomed 2 men Penny recognized as Montgomery's personal guards, former soldiers the banker employed for security. Mrs. Fletcher, the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy. Heard you had company in town. Didn't expect to find you disturbing evidence in an ongoing investigation. Investigation, Penny challenged. You called it a random robbery and closed the case within a day. Mills's gaze shifted to Finn. And you are, Finn Blackwell, friend of the deceased. Well, Mr. Blackwell, I'm going to have to ask you both to vacate these premises. Mr. Montgomery has concerns about valuable property being removed from this establishment. Penny felt her face flush with anger. This shop belongs to me, Sheriff. My husband built it with his own hands. Actually, madam, Mills said with false regret. According to the bank, your husband took out a substantial loan against this property 3 months ago. Given his unfortunate passing and the outstanding debt, Mr. Montgomery has legal claim to secure the premises and its contents. That's impossible, Penny protested. Thomas would never. Perhaps there were things your husband didn't share with you, Mrs. Fletcher. The sheriff's tone was patronizing. Now, I'll ask again politely, please leave or my deputies will escort you out. Finn's hand remained near his weapon, but his posture was deceptively relaxed. We'll go, he said, surprising Penny, but I'd be interested to see this loan documentation. Being a friend of Thomas's, you understand. You can take that up with the bank during business hours, Mills replied coldly. For now, I need whatever you've just found there. Penny clutched the notebook tighter. These are my husband's personal effects, evidence, Mills corrected. Hand it over, Mrs. Fletcher. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Finn stepped slightly in front of Penny, his movement subtle but clear in its intent. The lady said they're personal effects, Sheriff. Unless you have a warrant specifically naming those items, I suggest you reconsider your demand. The tension in the room thickened. The two guards shifted, hands moving toward their weapons. For a moment, Penny feared bloodshed would stain her husband's workshop. Then Finn did something unexpected. He laughed. Sheriff, let's not get excited over some carpentry notes and a sketch. He gently took the notebook from Penny's hands and flipped through it for Mills to see. See here, measurements for furniture, hardly criminal evidence. He closed it and tucked it into his vest pocket. I promised Mrs. Fletcher I'd help settle her husband's affairs. That includes determining the value of his designs for estate purposes. Mills hesitated, clearly unwilling to force a confrontation with a man whose competence with a weapon was evident in his bearing. You have until noon to remove any personal belongings from the premises, the sheriff finally said. After that, the building will be sealed pending resolution of the bank's claim. Very generous, Finn replied, his tone making it clear he thought it was anything but, we'll be quick about it. Once the sheriff and his men had departed, Penny turned to Finn with wide eyes. Thomas never took out a loan, never. We were saving to expand the business, but he wouldn't have gone into debt. I believe you, Finn said, pulling the notebook from his pocket. Just as I believe this isn't really about carpentry. He showed her the map he'd concealed between the pages. Your husband was planning something involving the bank, Mrs. Fletcher, something that got him killed. Penny stared at the documents, her world tilting yet again. Are you suggesting Thomas was, planning to rob the bank, or exposing someone who was? Finn replied. Either way, we need to move quickly, gather anything personal you want to keep. I have a feeling we won't be welcome back here after today. With her mind reeling, Penny collected Thomas's personal tools, the ones that had been his father's before him, along with the framed portrait of their wedding day that had sat on his desk. As she worked, a terrible thought took shape. If Thomas didn't take out that loan, she said slowly, then someone forged his signature. They're stealing not just his life's work, but his reputation as well. Finn nodded grimly. And they're willing to kill to cover their tracks. They left the workshop with a small bundle of Thomas's belongings, the precious notebook hidden safely in Finn's vest. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, Penny couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. What now? She asked quietly. Now we find out what your husband discovered that was worth killing for, Finn replied, guiding her away from the shop. And we do it carefully, because whoever pulled the trigger is still out there and they know we're looking. The Yankton Territorial Bank stood like a fortress at the corner of Main Street and Cedar Avenue, its stone facade a stark contrast to the wooden structures surrounding it. Penny and Finn observed it from the relative safety of the hotel restaurant across the street, sharing a pot of coffee as they planned their next move. The bank doesn't open until 10, Penny noted, watching as a clerk unlocked the front door to prepare for the day's business. Which gives us just enough time to make some inquiries. Finn studied Thomas's notebook, which now lay open between them. These notes suggest your husband discovered something in the bank's construction, possibly a vulnerability. But why would Thomas care about that? He was a carpenter, not a... She couldn't bring herself to say the word. Thief, Finn finished for her. And I don't believe he was, but he might have discovered something during a legitimate commission. He tapped a page in the notebook. See here, hidden compartment behind east wall panels, not in original plans. Thomas had an eye for construction details others might miss. So you think he found some sort of secret room in the bank, or a safe, something Montgomery wanted kept hidden. Finn's gaze returned to the bank building. The question is, what's inside it that's worth killing for? Before Penny could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the bank, Elijah Montgomery himself, resplendent in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the frontier town. He paused on the steps, speaking to his guards, one of whom glanced toward the hotel. Don't look, Finn warned quietly. Finish your coffee naturally. Penny obeyed, though her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the cup to her lips. He's coming this way, isn't he? Yes, and this might be our opportunity to learn something. Finn closed the notebook and slipped it back into his vest. Follow my lead. Moments later, the restaurant door opened and Montgomery strode in, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked dark hair. At 45, he cut an imposing figure, his Chicago sophistication setting him apart in the Dakota Territory. His smile when he spotted Penny didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Fletcher, what a pleasant surprise, he said, approaching their table with practiced charm. I'd heard you had returned to town. Penny managed a polite nod. Mr. Montgomery, my sincere condolences again on your loss. His gaze shifted to Finn. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Finn stood, offering his hand. Finn Blackwell, I'm helping Mrs. Fletcher settle her late husband's affairs. Montgomery's handshake was brief and cool. A friend of the family of Thomas, Finn clarified. We served together. Ah, a military man. Montgomery's assessment was swift and calculating. Well, I'm glad Mrs. Fletcher has support during this difficult time. In fact, I was hoping to discuss the matter of her husband's workshop today. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting at the bank. That would be most helpful, Penny said, surprising both men with her agreeable tone. We were just discussing the loan you mentioned to Sheriff Mills. I'm afraid I have no recollection of Thomas arranging such financing. A flicker of something annoyance, concern, crossed Montgomery's face before his smile reasserted itself. Grief can cloud memories, Mrs. Fletcher. Your husband came to me quite concerned about cash flow. I was happy to help an upstanding businessman like Mr. Fletcher. I'd very much like to see the paperwork, Finn interjected. For the estate records, you understand. Of course. Why don't you both come by at 11? I'll have my clerk pull the relevant documents. Montgomery replaced his hat. And perhaps we can discuss a fair settlement for the property. I understand your situation is precarious, Mrs. Fletcher. Your concern is touching, Penny replied, managing to keep the bitterness from her voice. Montgomery inclined his head. Until 11, then. He departed as smoothly as he had arrived, leaving an undercurrent of tension in his wake. He's lying, Penny whispered once he was out of earshot. Yes, Finn agreed, but now we have a legitimate reason to enter the bank and look around. He leaned forward. While I meet with Montgomery, you need to find an excuse to explore the east side of the building where Thomas noted that hidden compartment. How am I supposed to do that? Penny asked, alarmed at the suggestion. You're a grieving widow settling your husband's affairs. People make allowances. Finn's eyes held hers. Can you do this, Mrs. Fletcher? It could be dangerous. Penny thought of Thomas, of his body lying in the alley behind his beloved workshop, of the life they'd built together that someone had tried to erase. Determination hardened within her. Call me Penny, she said. And yes, I can do this. 11 o'clock found them climbing the marble steps to the bank's imposing entrance. Inside, polished counters and brass fixtures spoke of Montgomery's desire to bring Eastern refinement to the Dakota Territory. Clerks worked behind a long counter, while private offices lined the east wall exactly where Thomas's notes had indicated the hidden compartment might be. Montgomery greeted them in the lobby, all smiles and solicitude. Mrs. Fletcher, Mr. Blackwell, right this way to my office. As they followed him, Penny noticed a door marked washroom near the end of the hallway, conveniently located on the east side of the building. She caught Finn's eye briefly, receiving a nearly imperceptible nod of understanding. Montgomery's office was opulent for a frontier bank, leather-upholstered chairs, a massive oak desk, and a large safe prominently displayed in one corner. He gestured for them to sit while he retrieved a folder from his desk drawer. Here we are, the loan agreement signed by Thomas Fletcher 3 months ago, securing $400 against the workshop property. He slid the document across the desk. As you can see, the terms were quite favorable. I always try to support local businesses. Finn examined the paper carefully. And the funds were dispersed directly to Mr. Fletcher. Naturally. He preferred cash, many businessmen do. Penny leaned forward to see the document, her heart sinking at the sight of what appeared to be Thomas's signature at the bottom. It looked authentic at first glance, but something was off about the final flourish. Thomas always ended his signature with a distinctive upward stroke, a habit from his carpentry markings. "I'm feeling rather faint," she said suddenly, pressing a hand to her forehead. "The strain of all this." "Might I trouble you for the use of your washroom?" Montgomery frowned but nodded. "Of course, down the hall to your left." "I'll be but a moment," Penny assured them, rising with deliberate unsteadiness. Once in the hallway, she moved quickly toward the washroom, but instead of entering, she continued past it to where the corridor made a sharp turn. Thomas's notes had indicated a panel near the corner that didn't match the others, slightly newer, installed during a renovation 6 months earlier. Penny ran her fingers along the wainscoting, feeling for any irregularity. Finding nothing obvious, she pressed against different sections, remembering how Thomas had created hidden catches in furniture for wealthy clients who wanted secret compartments. Just as she was about to give up, her thumb pressed a knot in the wood that yielded slightly. A soft click rewarded her persistence, and a section of paneling about 2 feet square swung inward on concealed hinges. Behind it lay a small cavity containing a leather ledger and a stack of papers. Penny's hands shook as she reached for them, knowing she had only moments before her absence became suspicious. She grabbed the ledger and quickly closed the panel, tucking her find into the deep pocket of her skirt just as footsteps sounded in the hallway. One of Montgomery's guards appeared around the corner, his expression hardening when he spotted her. "Mrs. Fletcher, the washroom is back that way," he said, gesturing toward the door she had passed. "This area is private." "Forgive me," Penny said, summoning a flustered smile. "I must have turned the wrong way. Everything's been so confusing since Thomas." She let her voice trail off, playing up her widow's distress. The guard's stern expression softened marginally. "Let me escort you back." When they returned to Montgomery's office, Finn was engaged in what appeared to be a cordial conversation with the banker, though Penny recognized the tension in his shoulders. "Ah, Mrs. Fletcher," Montgomery said. "Feeling better, I hope?" "Somewhat," she replied, retaking her seat. The hidden ledger seemed to burn against her side, a dangerous secret mirror inches from its owner. "As I was explaining to Mr. Blackwell, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to offer a very fair settlement, $300 for the workshop and its contents. This would clear the outstanding loan and leave you with a small sum to start fresh." Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps even enough to return east to family." "That's very generous," Finn remarked before Penny could respond. "Though I wonder why the offer is so urgent. Surely the normal probate process would allow Mrs. Fletcher time to properly assess the value of her husband's business." Montgomery's smile tightened. "The bank has obligations to its shareholders, Mr. Blackwell. Carrying non-performing loans affects our standing. I'm simply trying to resolve matters efficiently for everyone's benefit." "Of course," Finn nodded. "Well, Mrs. Fletcher and I will need to discuss your offer. Perhaps we could give you our answer tomorrow." "I'd prefer to settle this today," Montgomery pressed. "The paperwork is already prepared." Penny felt the weight of the ledger in her pocket. Whatever it contained had cost Thomas his life. She needed time to examine it safely, away from Montgomery's watchful eyes. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, finding strength in her growing conviction that this man was involved in her husband's murder. "I appreciate your concern for my financial well-being, but I will not be rushed into decisions about my husband's legacy. We will review your offer and respond tomorrow." The banker's pleasant facade slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of cold anger before he regained his composure. "As you wish, Mrs. Fletcher. But I should warn you, property values in Yankton can be unpredictable. My offer may not remain so generous." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. Finn stood, offering his hand to Montgomery with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We understand completely. Until tomorrow, then." As they left the bank, Penny could feel Montgomery's gaze boring into her back. Once they were safely away, Finn guided her toward the boardwalk on the opposite side of the street. "Did you find something?" he asked quietly. Penny nodded, her hand pressing against her pocket. A ledger, hidden exactly where Thomas's notes indicated. "We need to get somewhere safe to examine it," Finn said, scanning the street with practiced vigilance. "Montgomery's men will be watching us now. We can't go back to my house," Penny realized. "They'll expect that." "I've taken a room at the Dakota Hotel," Finn replied. "It's not ideal, but it has a back entrance and thick walls." As they walked, maintaining a casual pace to avoid drawing attention, Penny felt the first stirrings of hope since Thomas's death. Whatever he had discovered, whatever had cost him his life, was now in her possession. With Finn's help, perhaps justice was possible after all. What neither of them could know was how that justice would bind their fates together, or that the ledger hidden in Penny's pocket would unravel not just Thomas's murder, but a conspiracy that reached far beyond the borders of Yankton. Finn's room at the Dakota Hotel was sparse but clean, with a single window overlooking the alley behind the building. He secured the door and drew the curtains before nodding to Penny, who withdrew the leather-bound ledger from her pocket with trembling hands. "This is what Thomas died for," she said softly, placing it on the small table between them. Finn lit the lamp, casting a warm glow over the weathered cover. "Let's see what secrets it holds." The ledger's pages contained columns of figures and notations, at first glance appearing to be routine banking records. But as they examined it more closely, patterns emerged that made little sense for a legitimate financial institution. These entries, Finn pointed to a recurring notation. "Gold shipments, far larger than what a town this size would normally process." Penny frowned, studying the dates. "And look here, deposits from names I don't recognize. Maxwell, Thornton, Hargrove, none of these are local families." "They're not families at all," Finn said grimly. "They're outlaws. I've tracked bounties on at least 3 of these names." He turned another page. "Montgomery's been laundering money for some of the most notorious gangs in the territory, using his bank as cover." "But why would Thomas have discovered this?" Penny wondered. "He was just a carpenter." Finn flipped back through the ledger until he found entries from 6 months prior. "Here, renovation of East Office wall, payment to Fletcher Carpentry." His finger traced down to a note in a different hand. "F. Discovered false panel during installation." Potential liability. Thomas found the hidden compartment while working on the renovation, Penny realized, her heart sinking. Montgomery knew he might have seen something. And when Thomas started asking questions or acting suspicious, Montgomery decided to eliminate the risk. Finn closed the ledger. "This is enough to bring down Montgomery and his operation, but only if we get it to the right authorities, not the local sheriff, who's clearly in Montgomery's pocket." "The territorial marshal," Penny suggested, "if we can reach him." "The nearest federal office is in Sioux Falls, 3 days' ride from here." Finn's expression grew serious. "And Montgomery won't let us leave town easily, not once he realizes what we have." As if summoned by his words, the sound of boots on the hotel stairs reached them through the thin walls. Finn moved instantly to the door, listening intently. "Company," he whispered, drawing his revolver. "Gather the ledger and anything else you need. We're leaving." "How?" Penny whispered back, clutching the incriminating book to her chest. Finn moved to the window, peering carefully around the curtain edge. "The alley's clear. It's a short drop to the awning below, then to the ground." Before Penny could protest the idea of climbing out a second-story window, a heavy knock sounded at the door. Blackwell. Sheriff Mills's voice carried clearly through the wood. "Open up. I have questions regarding your business in Yankton." Finn motioned for Penny to stay silent as he eased the window open. The knocking intensified, accompanied by the sound of multiple men positioning themselves in the hallway. "Last chance, Blackwell. Open this door or we're coming in." "Go," Finn mouthed to Penny, helping her onto the windowsill. The drop to the awning below seemed impossibly far, but with the sounds of the door being forced behind her, Penny found courage she didn't know she possessed. She slid from the sill, landing with a jolt on the canvas awning, which sagged but held under her weight. Above, she heard the door splinter as Finn followed her out the window. Together they clambered down to the alley, the ledger safely tucked inside Penny's coat. No sooner had their feet touched the ground than shouts erupted from the window above. "There they are, in the alley. Run!" Finn grabbed Penny's hand, pulling her into a sprint as a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wooden crate beside them. They raced through the maze of alleys behind Yankton's Main Street, Finn leading with the confidence of someone who had already mapped potential escape routes. Penny's heart pounded in her chest, her widow's skirts hampering her stride, but fear and determination kept her moving. "Where are we going?" she gasped as they ducked behind a livery stable. "The river," Finn replied, checking behind them before continuing. "There's a trading post 2 miles downstream. The owner, Jacob Turner, is no friend of Montgomery's. He'll help us get to Sioux Falls." More shouts echoed behind them as they reached the edge of town, the Missouri River gleaming dully in the afternoon sun. A small path wound along its banks, partially obscured by willows and cottonwoods. "Stay low," Finn instructed as they followed the path, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant. "They'll expect us to take horses from the livery or try for the stage road." For an hour they made their way along the riverbank, the tension gradually easing as the sounds of Yankton faded behind them. Penny's legs ached, unused to such exertion, but she pressed on without complaint. The ledger against her side was a constant reminder of why they ran for Thomas, for justice, for truth. Finally, a collection of log buildings came into view around a bend in the River Turner's trading post, a vital link between the settlements and the more remote homesteads in the territory. Smoke curled from the main building's chimney and several horses stood hitched outside. "Wait here," Finn said, guiding Penny into the cover of some trees. "Let me make sure it's safe." She nodded, sinking gratefully onto a fallen log as Finn approached the trading post with casual confidence, as if he were merely a traveler stopping for supplies. Through the trees, she watched him speak with a bearded man who emerged from the main building, their conversation too distant to hear. After what seemed an eternity, Finn gestured for her to join them. On unsteady legs, Penny made her way to the trading post where the bearded man, Turner, she presumed regarded her with kind but wary eyes. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said with a respectful nod. "Finn here says you're in some trouble with Montgomery and his cronies. We have evidence of his crimes," Penny replied, her hand going to the hidden ledger. "Evidence that cost my husband his life." Turner's expression hardened. "Montgomery's been squeezing every honest businessman in the county for years. Drove my brother's place under, then bought the land for pennies." He glanced at Finn. "What's your plan?" "Get to Sioux Falls, find the marshal," Finn explained, "but Montgomery's men will be watching the roads." Turner stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I've got a supply boat heading downriver at dawn, flour and goods for Fort Randall. The boatman's my cousin, trustworthy. He can take you as far as the fort where you can get fresh horses for Sioux Falls." "We'll need to lie low until morning," Finn said, glancing back toward Yankton. "Montgomery won't give up easily." "There's a cabin out back my trapper's use," Turner offered. "Not fancy, but it's hidden in the trees. You'll be safe there for the night." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the river, Penny found herself sitting on the cabin's small porch, the events of the day washing over her in waves of exhaustion and disbelief. Just yesterday, she had been a grieving widow with no hope of justice. Now she was a fugitive, running for her life with a man she barely knew, carrying evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in Yankton. Finn emerged from the cabin, having checked and cleaned his weapon, and settled beside her on the rough-hewn bench. For a long moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching the river flow past, steady and unchanging despite the chaos of human lives along its banks. "I never thanked you properly," Penny said finally, "for coming when Thomas called, for believing me when no one else would." Finn's gaze remained on the river, Thomas saved my life at Antietam, pulled me from a field where I'd been left for dead." His voice was quiet, reflective. "The debt I owed him, it wasn't something I could ever repay. But this helping you find the truth, bringing his killers to justice, it's something, at least." "It's everything," Penny replied softly. "You're the only one who came when I needed help. Everyone else in town, people who'd known Thomas for years, they just offered empty condolences and moved on." "People fear men like Montgomery," Finn said. "Can't entirely blame them for keeping their heads down." "I can," Penny said with sudden fierceness. "Fear doesn't excuse abandoning what's right. Thomas wouldn't have abandoned them if the situations were reversed." A small smile touched Finn's lips. "No, he wouldn't have. He was always stubbornly righteous, even in the war when righteousness seemed in mighty short supply." "Tell me about him," Penny requested. "As you knew him, sometimes I wonder if I really knew all of who he was." Finn considered this, his weathered features softening in memory. Thomas was the kind of man who saw the best in everyone sometimes, even when it wasn't there to see, quiet but with an iron core when it mattered. He glanced at her. "He spoke of you often during the war. The girl waiting back home, the future he was fighting for." Tears pricked at Penny's eyes, but she blinked them away. "And now that future's gone." "Changed," Finn corrected gently. "Not gone, you're still here, still fighting. Thomas would be proud of that." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Penny, a place that had been numb with grief for days. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt truly alive, afraid, uncertain, but alive. "Tomorrow we take his evidence to people who can use it," she said, newfound determination strengthening her voice. "And Montgomery answers for what he's done." "That's the plan," Finn agreed, though something in his tone suggested he anticipated complications. As darkness settled fully over the river, they retreated inside the small cabin. Turner had provided a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, which they ate in the warm glow of the cabin's single lamp. Afterward, Finn spread his bedroll on the floor, insisting Penny take the narrow cot against the wall. "I'll keep first watch," he said, checking his revolver once more. "Try to get some rest." Penny wanted to protest that she was too wired to sleep, but as soon as her head touched the folded blanket serving as a pillow, exhaustion claimed her. Her last conscious thought was of Thomas not as she had last seen him, cold and still in death, but as he had been in life, laughing, full of dreams for their future. And somehow, in the strange logic of near sleep, Finn's face merged with that memory, as if the two men who had mattered most in her life were connected beyond mere friendship or circumstance. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, until Finn's hand on her shoulder gently roused her. Outside, the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the river. "Time to go," he said softly. "The boat's ready." Penny rose quickly, splashing cold water on her face from the basin by the door and pinning her hair as neatly as circumstances allowed. The ledger remained secure in the inner pocket Turner had sewn into her coat the night before, a precaution against accidental loss or theft. Turner met them outside with hot coffee and information. "Got word from a friendly freight driver that Montgomery's men were searching all night, checking the stage depot, the trails out of town. They've got a substantial reward offered for information on your whereabouts." "How substantial?" Finn asked, his expression grim. $500. Turner shook his head. "That's more than most folks around here see in a year. Makes for some mighty tempting disloyalty." "All the more reason to move quickly," Finn said, guiding Penny toward the small dock where a flat-bottomed riverboat was moored. A stocky man with Turner's same shrewd eyes was loading the last of several flour barrels. "This is my cousin, Illy," Turner introduced them. "He'll get you to Fort Randall safe and quiet." Illy nodded a greeting. "Keep your heads down when we pass other boats." River's the main thoroughfare in these parts, eyes everywhere. They boarded the simple vessel, finding places to sit among the cargo. As Illy cast off and the current caught the boat, Penny looked back at the trading post, already growing small in the distance. Somewhere beyond it lay Yankton, where she had buried her husband and her old life. "We'll be back," Finn said, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. "Once Montgomery's been dealt with properly." "Will we?" Penny wondered aloud. "Sometimes I think there's nothing left for me there but memories." Finn didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the river ahead. "Memories have their place," he finally said, "but so does starting fresh. Thomas would want that for you, I think." The mention of Thomas's wishes for her future from this man who had known her husband in ways she never had stirred complex emotions in Penny's chest. Gratitude, grief, and something else she wasn't ready to name. For now, she let the river carry her away from danger, the precious ledger safe against her side and Finn's steady presence beside her the only certainty in her suddenly uncharted life. The journey downriver passed in tense vigilance, every approaching boat or riverside settlement causing Finn and Ellie to exchange wary glances. They traveled through the day, the spring sun warming the air while the river's breeze kept them cool. Penny found herself watching Finn when he wasn't looking the way he scanned the shoreline with practiced eyes, the tension in his shoulders gradually easing as the miles between them and Yankton increased. "You've done this before," she observed during a rare moment of privacy as Ellie attended to the boat's rudder. Running from trouble, Finn's smile was brief but genuine. "Usually toward it, actually. Bounty hunting isn't a profession for those who prefer safety." "What made you choose such a life?" Penny asked, genuinely curious about this man who had appeared so suddenly in her world, yet already seemed essential to it. "After the war, I tried settling down," he said, his gaze distant with memory. "Took work at my uncle's livery in Illinois, courted a local girl named Sarah. Thought I could pretend the man who went to war never existed." He shook his head. "It didn't take. The nightmares, the restlessness. Sarah deserved better than a man who couldn't sleep through the night without reaching for his gun. So you left," Penny concluded softly. "So I left," Finn confirmed. "Found I had a talent for tracking men who didn't want to be found. It gave purpose to skills I'd rather not have needed to learn." His eyes met hers directly. "What about you? What brought you and Thomas to Yankton?" "Dreams of building something of our own," Penny replied. Thomas had apprenticed with a master carpenter in Pennsylvania, but all the established shops there belonged to older craftsmen with sons to inherit them. The Dakota Territory offered land and opportunity for those willing to work hard. She smiled sadly. "And we did work hard. For 3 years we saved every penny, built the shop, made a name for Fletcher carpentry. Thomas was just starting to get commissions from the wealthier families when Montgomery arrived," Finn finished. "Yes, everything changed after that. New businesses appeared, old ones struggled or sold out. Thomas was one of the few who refused Montgomery's offers to buy him out. A principled stand," Finn observed. "Thomas believed craftsmanship mattered more than quick profit," Penny said, pride warming her voice. "He built pieces meant to last generations." Ellie called from the stern, interrupting their conversation. "Fort's coming up around the next bend. Best get your story straight. Military men ask questions." Finn nodded, turning to Penny. "We're a married couple heading to Sioux Falls to visit your ailing mother. Simple, easy to remember, hard to disprove." Penny felt her cheeks warm at the casual suggestion they pose as husband and wife, but the practicality of it was undeniable. A woman traveling alone with a male companion who wasn't her husband would invite unwanted scrutiny. "Married," she repeated, twisting her wedding band Thomas's ring with sudden self-consciousness. Finn noticed the gesture and his expression softened. "Just for the journey," he assured her. "To keep you safe." Fort Randall appeared around the river bend, its wooden palisade walls rising above the water's edge. A small dock extended into the river, where several military personnel supervised the unloading of supplies from another boat. Ellie guided their vessel alongside the dock, calling greetings to the soldiers as if this were any routine delivery. Finn helped Penny disembark, his hand steady at her elbow, his posture relaxed but alert. A young lieutenant approached, clipboard in hand. Name and business at Fort Randall. Finn and Penny Blackwell, Finn replied smoothly, his arm slipping around Penny's waist in a gesture both protective and convincingly familiar. Just passing through on our way to Sioux Falls. My wife's mother has taken ill. Penny managed a solemn nod, leaning slightly into Finn's embrace as if seeking comfort. The lieutenant's expression softened with sympathy. Sorry to hear that, madam. You'll be wanting transport then, if possible, Finn confirmed. We heard the stage comes through tomorrow. That it does, but it's usually full up from Yankton, the lieutenant considered. There's a supply wagon heading to Sioux Falls this afternoon, not as comfortable as the stage, but it'll get you there faster. That would be perfect, Penny said, summoning a grateful smile. We're anxious to reach Mother as quickly as possible. The lieutenant directed them to the fort's small trading post where they could wait for the supply wagon's departure. Ellie unloaded Turner's goods for the fort, exchanged a few quiet words with Finn, and prepared to continue downriver with his remaining cargo. Good luck, he said, tipping his hat to Penny. Jacob will be expecting word of your safe arrival. Once inside the trading post, Finn purchased supplies for their continuing journey: jerky, hardtack, canteens of fresh water. The small store was busy with soldiers and travelers, providing welcome anonymity. So far, so good, Finn murmured as they found seats on a bench outside to await the wagon. No sign Montgomery's men have reached this far yet. Will the ledger be enough? Penny asked, keeping her voice low. To convince the marshal, I mean. It should be. Names, dates, amounts, its detailed evidence of money laundering and likely other crimes. Finn's expression grew serious. But Montgomery won't go down without a fight. Men like him have friends in high places. Then we'll have to find higher places, Penny replied with newfound determination. The supply wagon departed Fort Randall mid-afternoon with Finn and Penny seated among crates of ammunition and medical supplies. The driver, a grizzled Army veteran named Cooper, seemed content with minimal conversation, which suited their need for discretion. The road to Sioux Falls stretched ahead through rolling prairie, the spring landscape dotted with wildflowers and new grass. Under different circumstances, Penny might have found the journey pleasant, even invigorating. As it was, every passing rider caused her to tense, every distant dust cloud to hold her breath until it proved harmless. Night found them camping beside a small creek, Cooper building a fire while Finn helped unload essential supplies from the wagon. Penny gathered kindling, grateful for the simple, purposeful task that kept her mind occupied. Should reach Sioux Falls by tomorrow evening, Cooper informed them as they shared a simple meal of beans and coffee. Weather holds, that is. Any law troubles along this route? Finn asked casually. We've heard stories of road agents, Cooper shrugged. Occasional trouble, but the Army patrols keep most of the riffraff away from the main roads. You're safer than you'd be on the stage, truth be told. Bandits know Army wagons carry men who shoot back. After their meal, Cooper retired to his bedroll, leaving Finn and Penny sitting by the fire. The night was clear, stars pricking the vast Dakota sky like distant lanterns. Penny found herself staring into the flames, exhaustion and uncertainty washing over her in equal measure. We should rest, Finn suggested gently. Tomorrow could be a long day. I'm not sure I can sleep, Penny admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see Thomas lying in that alley. I see Montgomery's face when he realizes we've escaped with his secrets. I see, she broke off, surprised by the sudden constriction in her throat. Finn moved closer, his shoulder a solid presence against hers. It's the waiting that's hardest, he said. Once we reach Sioux Falls, once we take action, it gets easier, I promise you that. Does it? Penny looked up at him, searching his face in the firelight. After you've brought in a bounty, after justice is done, does the waiting and watching and fearing ever really stop? Something vulnerable flickered in Finn's eyes. Not entirely, he admitted, but you learn to live alongside it. To find moments of peace despite it. Without thinking, Penny reached for his hand, her fingers closing around his calloused palm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not just doing this out of obligation to Thomas, for seeing me as someone worth helping too." Finn's hand tightened around hers. "Penny," he began, his voice rough with emotion he clearly rarely expressed. Whatever he might have said was lost as Cooper suddenly sat bolt upright, his hand going to the rifle beside his bedroll. "Riders," he hissed. "Douse the fire." Finn moved instantly, kicking dirt over the flames while drawing his revolver. Penny scrambled to her feet, heart pounding as the distant sound of hoofbeats grew louder. "Could be a patrol," Cooper muttered, but his tense posture suggested he didn't believe it. "Army patrols announce themselves," Finn countered. "These riders are trying for quiet." He turned to Penny. "Stay close to the wagon. If there's trouble, get under it and stay still." The hoofbeats grew closer, then slowed to a walk. In the moonlight, Penny could make out 4 mounted figures approaching cautiously from the road. "Hello, the camp," called a voice that sent ice through Penny's veins. "Sheriff Mills." "Evening," Cooper answered, rifle ready but not yet raised. "Army supply wagon, identify yourselves." "Yankton Law," Mills replied, "tracking fugitives, man and woman wanted for theft and murder." Finn stepped forward, positioning himself between the riders and Penny. "Murder," he called. "That's a new charge, Sheriff." Mills's laugh was cold in the darkness. "Blackwell. Should have known you wouldn't get far. Where's the woman and the ledger she stole?" "I stole nothing," Penny declared, ignoring Finn's warning glance as she moved to stand beside him. "That ledger belonged to my husband, the man your employer murdered." The sheriff dismounted, his 3 deputies following suit. In the dim starlight, Penny could see the determined set of their faces. These men hadn't ridden this far to make arrests, they had come to eliminate problems. "Cooper," Finn said evenly, "these men are not legitimate law officers. They're working for a criminal banker who's trying to cover up evidence of his crimes." Cooper's weathered face revealed nothing as he assessed the situation. "That right, Sheriff?" "Don't listen to them," Mills snapped. "We have legal warrants for their arrest." "Stand aside, and this doesn't concern you." "I'm transporting federal property and passengers under Army protection," Cooper replied, his rifle now leveled at the sheriff's chest. "So it does concern me if you're planning violence on this road." A tense silence fell as both sides measured each other's resolve. Then one of the deputies, young and nervous, shifted his weight, his boots scraping against stone. The sound was like a trigger. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night's stillness. Finn shoved Penny toward the wagon as bullets splintered the wood around them. She scrambled beneath it, pressing herself against the earth as more shots rang out. Cooper fired twice, then crumpled with a grunt of pain. Finn returned fire methodically, his movements controlled even in chaos. 2 deputies fell, but Mills and the remaining man pressed forward, using the darkness for cover. "The ledger, Mrs. Fletcher," Mills shouted. "Give it up and you might live to see morning." Penny's hand went to her coat where the damning evidence rested against her heart. Everything Thomas's death, their flight, the violence now erupting around them, all of it came down to this book of numbers and names. A record of corruption that had cost her husband his life. A shadow fell across her hiding place. The last deputy had circled behind the wagon. She saw his boots, heard his breathing as he bent to look underneath. Without thinking, Penny lashed out with all her strength, driving her boot into his knee. The man howled in pain, stumbling backward. In that moment of distraction, Finn appeared behind him, bringing the butt of his revolver down on the deputy's head. "We need to move," Finn urged, reaching under the wagon to pull Penny to safety. "Mills is still out there and Cooper's hit." They found the wagon driver slumped against a wheel, blood darkening his shirt. "Not as bad as it looks," he grunted as Finn examined the wound. "Got my shoulder, not my chest. Can you ride?" Finn asked, already moving toward the horses. "Been shot worse places," Cooper replied grimly. "Get the woman out of here, I'll manage." Finn helped Penny mount one of the wagon horses while he took the other. Cooper, despite his injury, insisted on staying with his cargo. "The fort will send men when I don't arrive on schedule," he assured them. "You get that evidence where it needs to go. Whatever it is, it's worth killing for, which means it's worth protecting." With a grateful nod to the wounded driver, Finn led Penny away from the ambush site, cutting cross-country rather than following the road where Mills might still lurk. The night enfolded them, the vast prairie offering both danger and sanctuary as they rode toward Sioux Falls and the promise of justice. Behind them, Cooper watched them disappear into the darkness, then turned his rifle toward a rustling sound in the nearby brush. Sheriff Mills emerged, hands raised in temporary surrender. "They're gone," Cooper informed him coldly. "And if you value your life, you'll be gone too before my relief arrives." Mills's face contorted with fury, but with 2 deputies dead and 1 unconscious, his advantage had evaporated. With a curse, he returned to his horse and rode off into the night, not back toward Yankton, but in the direction Finn and Penny had taken. The race for justice had become a race for survival, with both sides knowing only one could emerge victorious. Dawn found Finn and Penny sheltering in a shallow ravine, their exhausted horses grazing nearby. They had ridden through the night, pushing the animals as hard as they dared across unfamiliar terrain, guided only by the stars and Finn's woodsman's instinct. How much farther to Sioux Falls? Penny asked, her voice hoarse from the cold night air. 20 miles, maybe less, Finn replied, scanning the horizon. "We should reach it by midday if we push on soon." Penny nodded, trying to ignore her aching body and the fear that continued to gnaw at her edges. The ledger remained secure in her coat, its weight a constant reminder of their purpose. "You think Cooper will be all right?" she asked, troubled by the memory of the wagon driver's bloodied shirt. "He's tough and the wound wasn't fatal," Finn assured her. "Army patrols will find him soon enough. And Mills, do you think he gave up?" Finn's expression hardened. "Men like Mills don't give up when there's money and freedom at stake. He's still coming." They allowed themselves and their mounts a brief rest before continuing eastward, keeping to low ground where possible to avoid silhouetting themselves against the morning sky. Penny rode in silence, lost in thoughts of all that had transpired since Finn's arrival in Yankton just days ago. Her life had been upended first by Thomas's murder, then by the discovery of his secret knowledge, and now by this desperate flight across the Dakota prairie. Yet somehow, amidst the danger and grief, she felt more alive than she had in the numb days following her husband's death. There was purpose in her actions now, and hope, however fragile, for justice. And there was Finn. The stranger who had appeared at her darkest moment, who had believed her when no one else would, who now risked his life to help her fulfill Thomas's final mission. She found herself studying his profile as he rode beside her, noting the determination in his jaw, the watchfulness in his eyes that never fully abated. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After this is over, I mean, after we've delivered the ledger and Montgomery faces justice." Finn seemed surprised by the question. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Usually I deliver a bounty, collect payment, and move on to the next job." "Is that what this is to you? Just another job?" He glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "No," he said finally. "This hasn't been just a job since I found you at Thomas's grave." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. Penny looked away, focusing on the horizon where she could just make out what might be buildings in the far distance. "Is that it?" she asked, pointing. "Sioux Falls," Finn nodded. "Looks like it. We'll approach from the south, avoid the main road in case Mills has friends watching for us." As they drew closer to the settlement, the distant cluster of buildings resolved into a proper town larger than Yankton, with more permanent structures and signs of prosperity. Sioux Falls had grown rapidly since the railroad's arrival, becoming an important hub for the territory's commerce and governance. "The federal marshal's office should be near the courthouse," Finn said as they skirted the town's outskirts. Once we're there, you'll be under government protection while they verify the ledger's contents. And Montgomery, what happens to him? If the evidence is as damning as it appears, he'll face federal charges: conspiracy, fraud, money laundering. Possibly accessory to murder, depending on what else they uncover. Finn's expression grew grim. Men like him usually have resources hidden away, lawyers ready to argue, but even if he escapes the hangman, he'll lose his power, his position, his freedom. "It won't bring Thomas back," Penny said softly. "No," Finn agreed. "But it will honor what he died for, and it might save others from similar fates." They approached Sioux Falls from a wooded area south of town where they could observe the streets without being immediately visible. The town bustled with midday activity wagons and carriages moving along the main thoroughfare, pedestrians going about their business. "We'll stable the horses at that livery," Finn decided, nodding toward a building at the edge of town. "Then make our way to the marshal's office on foot. Easier to spot anyone following us that way." The livery owner asked no questions beyond what feed the horses required, accepting Finn's payment with a nod. Once the animals were settled, they made their way through the streets of Sioux Falls, Finn's arm protectively around Penny's waist in their continued guise as husband and wife. The marshal's office stood on a corner near the stone courthouse, its entrance marked by a simple sign. Finn scanned the street once more before guiding Penny toward the door. "Almost there," he murmured, his hand at the small of her back. They had just reached the boardwalk when Penny spotted a familiar figure down the street: Sheriff Mills, speaking urgently to a well-dressed man outside the telegraph office. As if sensing her gaze, Mills looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. "Finn," she whispered urgently. "Mills is here." Before Finn could respond, the door to the marshal's office swung open and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out, adjusting his hat against the midday sun. Penny felt Finn tense beside her. "Blackwell," the man said, surprise evident in his voice. "What the hell brings you to Sioux Falls?" "Marshal Davis," Finn acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "We have evidence of serious crimes that require federal attention." Davis's gaze shifted to Penny, then back to Finn. This is Mrs. Fletcher from Yankton. Her husband was murdered last week, likely because of information he discovered about illegal activities at the Territorial Bank." The marshal frowned. "Serious accusations. You'd better come inside." As they followed Davis into the office, Penny glanced back to see Mills hurrying toward them, the well-dressed man close behind. The door closed behind them just as Mills reached the boardwalk. Inside, the marshal's office was orderly and well-appointed, with wanted posters lining one wall and a locked gun cabinet behind the desk. Davis gestured for them to sit, his expression guarded. "I should tell you," he said before Finn could speak. "I received a telegraph from Yankton this morning. Sheriff Mills claims you've abducted a widow and stolen bank documents." Penny's heart sank. "That's not true. I came willingly, and the documents belong to my husband." "She's right," Finn added. "Thomas Fletcher discovered evidence of money laundering through the Yankton Territorial Bank. When he was murdered, his widow found his notes and a hidden ledger that details the operation. We believe the bank's owner, Elijah Montgomery, ordered Thomas's murder to protect his criminal enterprise." Davis leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "That's a serious charge against a prominent businessman." "One we can prove," Penny said with quiet confidence, withdrawing the ledger from her coat. "This contains records of deposits from known outlaws, withdrawals that don't match legitimate banking operations, and notes about hiding evidence, including one identifying my husband as a liability after he discovered their secret records room." Davis reached for the ledger, but before Penny could hand it over, the office door burst open. Sheriff Mills stood in the doorway, his remaining deputy and the well-dressed man from the telegraph office flanking him. "Marshal Davis," Mills announced, "I'm placing these two under arrest for theft and obstruction of justice." Davis rose slowly to his feet. "This is my jurisdiction, Sheriff. You have no authority to make arrests in Sioux Falls." The well-dressed man stepped forward. "Perhaps I can clarify matters. I'm Judge Harmon from the Territorial Court in Yankton. I've issued warrants for these individuals that are valid throughout Dakota Territory." Penny clutched the ledger tighter as a chill ran through her. Finn had warned that Montgomery had friends in high places, apparently including a territorial judge who could provide legal cover for his schemes. Finn stood, placing himself between Penny and the newcomers. "Marshal, before you honor those warrants, I suggest you examine the evidence Mrs. Fletcher has brought. It implicates not only Montgomery but potentially others in positions of power in Yankton." Davis hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "Judge Harmon is respected on the territorial bench, Blackwell. His warrants carry significant weight." "As does federal evidence of criminal conspiracy," Finn countered. "All we ask is that you review the ledger before deciding." The tension in the room was palpable as Davis considered this request. Finally, he held out his hand. "The ledger, Mrs. Fletcher. Let me see what's worth all this trouble." With a silent prayer, Penny placed the leather-bound book in the marshal's hands. Davis opened it, his expression neutral as he began to scan the pages. Judge Harmon shifted uncomfortably, while Mills's hand hovered near his weapon. After several long moments, Davis looked up, his face hardened into lines of official concern. "This contains serious allegations with specific details that warrant investigation." He turned to Judge Harmon. "I'm afraid I must temporarily set aside your warrants while I examine this evidence, Your Honor. These individuals will remain in federal custody until this matter is resolved." "This is outrageous," Harmon blustered. "Those documents are forgeries, clearly intended to defame upstanding citizens of Yankton." "If they're forgeries, my investigation will determine that," Davis replied calmly. "Sheriff, I suggest you and the judge return to Yankton. I'll be in touch regarding my findings." Mills's face darkened with fury. "Montgomery won't stand for this interference. He has friends beyond the territory." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" Davis asked quietly. The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of two deputy marshals, summoned by the raised voices. Their presence tipped the balance decisively in Davis's favor. With barely concealed rage, Mills and Harmon departed, leaving Penny and Finn alone with Marshal Davis and his deputies. "I hope that ledger contains what you claim," Davis said once they were gone, "because you've just made some dangerous enemies." "It does," Penny assured him. "And those men were already our enemies. They killed my husband. They would have killed us too if they'd caught us." Davis nodded slowly. "I'll need formal statements from both of you and I'll have experts examine this ledger. In the meantime, you'll stay under Marshall's protection." As the reality of their situation settled over her, Penny felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. They had reached safety and delivered the evidence, but the danger was far from over. Montgomery's reach extended further than they had imagined, and as long as he remained free, their lives were still at risk. She felt Finn's hand close gently over hers, a silent promise of continued protection. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by Thomas's memory, by shared danger, and by something new and fragile growing between them that neither dared yet name. The days that followed passed in a blur of statements, interviews, and waiting. Marshal Davis proved thorough in his investigation, dispatching deputies to Yankton to gather corroborating evidence while experts in banking examined the ledger's contents. Penny and Finn were housed in rooms above a reputable boarding house, with a deputy marshal posted outside for protection. On the third evening, Davis summoned them to his office, his expression grave but satisfied. "The evidence holds up," he informed them. "My deputies found the hidden compartment in the bank wall exactly where Mrs. Fletcher described it, along with additional documents Montgomery didn't have time to remove. We've also located 3 former bank employees who have confirmed suspicious practices, but were afraid to come forward. And Montgomery, Finn asked, arrested this morning on multiple federal charges. Judge Harmon as well, for obstruction of justice and likely conspiracy. Davis smiled thinly. Sheriff Mills tried to flee but didn't make it past Vermilion before my men caught up with him. Penny closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. And Thomas. Will they face charges for his murder? Davis's expression softened with genuine sympathy. We're building that case now, Mrs. Fletcher. One of Montgomery's men has already offered to testify against him in exchange for leniency. It appears Montgomery explicitly ordered your husband's elimination after discovering he had found their hidden record room. The confirmation of what she had suspected brought tears to Penny's eyes, not fresh grief, but the release of a burden she had carried since finding Thomas's body. He hadn't died randomly or senselessly. He had died because he discovered wrongdoing and likely planned to expose it. What happens now? She asked, wiping her eyes with as much dignity as she could muster. Montgomery and his conspirators will be transported to Yankton for arraignment, then likely to St. Paul for trial, given the federal nature of their crimes. Davis turned to Finn. The Treasury Department has authorized a substantial reward for breaking this case. Apparently, Montgomery's operation was laundering money for outlaws across 3 territories. Finn nodded acknowledgement, but seemed indifferent to the mention of reward money. And Mrs. Fletcher's safety? No longer at immediate risk, though I'd advise caution until the trials conclude. Davis hesitated. There's also the matter of her husband's property. With the fraudulent loan exposed, the workshop and all its contents revert to Mrs. Fletcher's ownership. Penny hadn't even considered this aspect of justice, the restoration of Thomas's legacy, his workshop where he had created beauty with skilled hands. It should have brought joy, but instead she felt a hollow uncertainty. What would she do with a carpentry shop? What would she do with any of it, now that justice had been served and her purpose fulfilled? As if sensing her thoughts, Finn spoke. Mrs. Fletcher will need time to consider her options. For now, she should remain under protection until Montgomery's trial. Davis agreed, and with assurances that they would be kept informed of all developments, they were dismissed. Outside the marshal's office, the spring evening had turned cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They walked in companionable silence back to the boarding house, each lost in their own thoughts. The danger had passed, justice was in motion, but the future remained unwritten. In the small parlor of the boarding house, they found themselves alone, the other residents either in their rooms or out for the evening. Penny stood by the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar streets of Sioux Falls. I should return to Yankton, she said finally. There's Thomas's grave to tend, his affairs to settle properly now that the truth is known. Finn nodded, standing beside her with his hands clasped behind his back. Of course, I can escort you when you're ready. The formality in his tone made her turn to look at him. And then my obligation is fulfilled, he said carefully. Thomas asked me to protect you to help find justice for him. That's been accomplished. Your obligation, Penny repeated, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Is that all this has been to you after all? Finn's expression softened, the mask of the professional bounty hunter slipping to reveal the man beneath. You know it hasn't, he admitted quietly. But I wouldn't presume what? Penny challenged, suddenly tired of unspoken things between them. That I might care for you. That in the midst of all this danger and grief, something else has grown. Thomas was my friend, Finn said, his voice rough with emotion. And you're his widow. There are bounds of propriety, of respect. Thomas is gone, Penny interrupted gently. I will always love him, always honor his memory. But he sent you to me, Finn, not just to protect me or avenge him, but perhaps because he knew. She trailed off, unable to articulate the sense that had been growing in her that Thomas's last act had been one of foresight as well as desperation. Finn took a step closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "What are you saying, Penny?" "I'm saying I don't want you to leave once we return to Yankton," she replied simply. "I'm saying that life continues even after grief. Thomas taught me that to seize happiness where it can be found." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "And I believe I could find happiness with you, Finn Blackwell, if you're brave enough to stay." The distance between them vanished as Finn moved forward, his hands gently framing her face. "I'm not a settled man," he warned. "I've lived by the gun and the trail for years." "Then perhaps it's time for a change," Penny suggested, her hands coming to rest against his chest. "The workshop will need someone to run it, someone with skilled hands and a sense of purpose." "A carpenter I'm not," Finn said with a small smile. "But you could learn. Or we could make it something new together." Penny's eyes held his, offering possibilities neither had dared contemplate until now. Thomas built things meant to last generations. Perhaps we could honor him by building a life that does the same. Finn's answer came not in words but in the gentle press of his lips against hers, tentative at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. It was a beginning, fragile and new, yet somehow rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. When they finally parted, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise I'll be good at settled life," he cautioned, "but I can promise to try for you." "That's all I ask," Penny replied. "That and perhaps one more thing. Name it. Help me make something meaningful of Thomas's legacy. He died protecting the truth. Let's live honoring it." Finn nodded, his arms encircling her in a promise more binding than words. Outside, the stars continued their eternal watch over the Dakota Territory, witnesses to an ending that had become, against all odds, a new beginning. 6 months later, Yankton bustled with autumn activity. Farmers brought in harvests, merchants prepared for winter stock, and the newly established Fletcher and Blackwell fine woodworking welcomed customers through doors that stood open to all. The workshop had been transformed, expanded, brightened, filled with both Thomas's original tools and new equipment that Finn had learned to use with growing skill. His bounty hunting days behind him, he had discovered an unexpected aptitude for woodworking, his steady hands and patience serving him well in this new profession. Penny moved among the display pieces, adjusting a cloth covering a particularly fine table commissioned by the new Territorial Bank president, an honest man brought in to replace Montgomery, who now awaited trial in a federal prison along with Judge Harmon and the disgraced Sheriff Mills. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. Penny looked up to see Mrs. Miller, one of Thomas's loyal patrons, entering with her young daughter. "Mrs. Blackwell," Mrs. Miller greeted her warmly, "is that dining set ready for viewing? My husband is most eager to see it completed." Penny smiled at the name she had taken 3 months earlier in a quiet ceremony attended by those few in Yankton who had stood by her during the dark days after Thomas's death. "Indeed it is. Finn has just finished applying the final coat of varnish yesterday." She led them to the back of the showroom, where a magnificent oak dining set stood proudly, the table and chairs bearing the distinctive touches that had made Thomas's work so sought after, but with new elements that reflected Finn's emerging style. Together, they had created something unique, a blend of tradition and innovation that honored the past while embracing the future. As Mrs. Miller exclaimed over the craftsmanship, Penny felt familiar arms encircle her waist from behind. Finn had returned from his errand, dust from the lumber mill still clinging to his shirt. "Successful delivery?" she asked quietly. "Very," he confirmed. "And I stopped by the cemetery on my way back, left fresh flowers for Thomas." The simple statement warmed Penny's heart. Finn had never tried to erase Thomas from their lives. Instead, he had helped her preserve his memory while building something new together. Thomas's grave was well tended, his name respected in town once the full story of his discovery and murder had become known. After the Millers departed, having enthusiastically purchased the dining set, Penny and Finn closed the shop for lunch. They walked to their home, Thomas's former house, now expanded with a new wing that Finn had built himself as a wedding present to Penny. "I had a letter from Marshal Davis this morning," Finn mentioned as they sat at their kitchen table. "Montgomery's trial is set for next month in St. Paul. They want us both to testify." Penny nodded, having expected this. "We'll go together, see it through to the end." "And then it truly will be over," Finn said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "A new chapter completely our own." Penny smiled, placing her free hand on her abdomen where the first subtle signs of new life had begun to make themselves known, a secret she planned to share with him that very evening. "I believe that chapter has already begun," she said, love evident in every word. "And I couldn't ask for a better co-author." As afternoon sunlight streamed through windows Thomas had crafted and Finn had expanded, it illuminated two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances. Their story born of tragedy but transcending it would continue in Yankton and beyond. Proof that even in the wild and often merciless Dakota Territory, justice could prevail and love could bloom from the ashes of loss. "No one helped me when he died," Penny had once said in the shadow of a fresh grave. "Then he sent me to do it now," Finn had replied, a stranger bound by an old promise. Neither could have imagined then how that promise would transform into something far greater, a love story written not in spite of the past, but because of it, honoring what had been lost by creating something new that would endure for generations to come.